Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you my fall reading recommendations. I feel like fall is like just one of the best seasons to read. I think like fall and winter, I think are my preferred reading season, especially I feel like I'm very much a mood reader and I like to kind of have books that kind of reflect the atmosphere that I'm in. So when I think of fall, I think of like soggy, cold nights, that like dark sky, I feel like that kind of chill in the air, and kind of it being damp. So I feel like that's just perfect reading weather to just kind of get cozy and read, light a candle, create that really fun atmosphere. So these are books that I think kind of fit into that fall vibe that I was describing. They're kind of all over in terms of genre too, so I think it'll make it a little bit interesting for you guys. So I'm excited to dive right in. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting up, I first have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book I read several years ago, but it is one that I feel like really kind of fits in with that kind of fall vibe, and it follows Addie LaRue, who on her wedding night ends up running away, and she makes a deal with the devil to basically, she doesn't want to belong to no man, and he basically spins that so she belongs to no one, essentially. So no one remembers her. She can like walk in a room, have a full conversation, walk out and come back in, and they don't remember her. So she's kind of forced to live with this, in addition to she kind of can't die. So she's kind of forced to kind of deal with her situation of no one remembering who she is, in addition to kind of living forever and kind of not being able to tie bonds. But all that changes when she walks into a bookstore and someone remembers her. So it kind of goes from there, and I really like this. This is my first V.E. Schwab book, and I really enjoyed it. I think it does have a very interesting premise, and kind of taking that like trope of no one remembering you and kind of like playing with that made it really a lot of fun to, and like a joy to read. I do think it makes for very interesting like situations, and I really liked it. There was like, I think there was one character who like owned or like works at the bookstore that had a very much woe is me mentality, which I did find a little bit annoying, but overall I really enjoyed this. I kind of think it fits with that like fall vibe. So yeah, like I said, you probably have heard of this book, but it is worth mentioning that I do really enjoy it, and I think it's a perfect time to read it during the fall. Next up, I have 9 Elms by Bryznda. This is his first book in his Kate Marshall series, and this one again is one that is perfect to read on like a cold, rainy autumnal day. And if you are a fan of like murder mysteries, I think this is the first one for you. This is very much a very introductory kind of pilot basically for this crime series, but I think it works really well as a standalone as well if you don't want to commit to it. But we follow Kate Marshall, who 15 years prior was what should have been like was a police officer, and she uncovered who was the 9 Elms serial killer. But what should have been the highlight of her career ended up being her downfall, because it used to be someone that she dated, and the media tore her apart because of that. So even though we're 15 years in the future, she's still very much trying to put the pieces of her life back together after that major kind of media like blitz on her. So she's very much still kind of struggling with the internal demons of that. But then when there are a string of murders taking place that have a very eerily similar MO, she kind of gets uninvited into the investigation. She currently is working as like a criminology professor, so she's very much kind of outside of that police detective work environment, but she ends up kind of getting sucked into the kind of the murder mystery of this one. And I thought this one was really fun, especially the ending was super intense, and it was really a lot of fun to read. I couldn't put it down, but if you like kind of that murder mystery and like kind of a past and present storyline intermingling, and like history repeating itself, then I think you would really love this book. I do really think this is a really good crime series. I think there's maybe only 3 or 4 books out currently, so it is a good one that you can marathon and be caught up relatively quickly. I always find that I fly through crime books, and this is one of them that I just read through really quickly. So again, like I said, even just looking at this cover, it just gives me fall vibes. Next up, this is a recent read for me, and it is The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman. this was one that took me by surprise. I've read her other books, and she very much kind of delves into kind of historical fiction, so I was expecting something like that. But this one, I would say, is like a historical fiction mixed or crossed with a murder mystery, which very much took me by surprise. We follow Sage, who 6 years ago thought her twin sister Rosemary died of pneumonia, but she finds out that her sister is in fact alive, but she was sent to the kind of like mental hospital or like mental state institution in the 1970s on Staten Island called Willowbrook, and she found out that her sister has run away. So she is determined. She's like, my twin sister is alive, I'm gonna go help find her. But when she arrives at Willowbrook, they mistaken her for her sister, so she gets basically confused as a patient, and she gets thrown into Willowbrook, which is the author doesn't sugarcoat basically the horrors of this kind of institution and like the reputation that this hospital or state school kind of had, just kind of the terrible patient conditions, the mistreating of patients, just the horror of it. And it was very upsetting to read, I'll give you that. Like, it was very upsetting to read how these people were treated, especially in the 1970s, which is still like, not that far away in the past. But it was just very upsetting to read how people with, mental disabilities or mental illnesses were treated. And the kind of fact that no one believes Sage is her sister also kind of got to me. Like, I was actually anxious. Like, I couldn't read this book. I had to like read it in small doses because I was so like wound up by reading it. And then kind of the second book turns into like a murder mystery type thriller, so it was like a very interesting book that took me by surprise in terms of like what it talked about. So I think this is the perfect fall book to read. I think it takes place in like January, February, but I think this is like a good time to read because not only is it a blend of like a not atmospheric, but a kind of blend of historical fiction with a murder mystery thriller. So if you like both those genres, I think this is the book for you. Next up, I have the kind of infamous dark academia book, which I think is the perfect book. I read this in October 2 years ago, and I really loved it, and it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is kind of the OG dark academia book that really kicked off this genre, and a lot of the kind of tropes that are prevalent today in dark academia books, this book was kind of the originator and creator of that. And I think this is a book, I think if you like kind of dark academia, I think this is a really great book to kind of read because you can see where everything started, where all of these themes and kind of tropes originated, and the writing of it is very interesting. I thought it was really well written. You can see why it's basically considered a modern classic, and yeah, it was just a joy to read. Basically, from the first page, we know who is going to die, and then from there, the entire book is basically the events leading up to the murder and then kind of the aftermath of that. But we follow these group of friends who go to this university, who are one of the elite for this kind of professor that only takes a handful of students kind of every so many years. So we follow the main character who wants to become involved and kind of become a part of this friend group, who study kind of the classics, Greek, all these things. You can see him kind of romanticize that world of academia, while also kind of, that there's gonna murder that's gonna take place. And I think this book is, like I said, a lot of fun. You can see why it is a classic, or considered a modern day classic. And also, this is a book that was sent to me by a subscriber, so this book always is near and dear to my heart. And like I said, if you like kind of dark academia, and I think like with the fall, school starting, kind of those kind of themes, I think dark academia is perfect to read this time of year. And lastly, I have a fantasy book here for you, and I have The Queen of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. This is the first book in the trilogy, and this is probably one of my favorite kind of adult fantasies. And I know the ending is very polarizing, especially the last book, but I think it was kind of the bittersweet ending that we should expect from this author. But basically, we follow Kelsey, who has just turned 18, and she now has to claim the rights to her throne. After her mother was killed, she kind of was sent away to live in the forest with a couple, and now she has to kind of claim the rights to her throne after her uncle took over as regent. And it's a very interesting dynamic because they take place in the future, but they are a regressed society in terms of technology. They do kind of mention things of, you know, kind of our society in terms of like technology. Like they mention like the 7 volumes of the Rolling series, like Harry Potter. Like they kind of mention kind of things that take place in modern day, but you don't really know how this kind of world came to be where it's like regressed and kind of has all this thing, which is something that delves into kind of in later books. But basically this book is really interesting. I think it is, again, a series that is very much polarized. People either love it or hate it, but I like really enjoyed it. I think it's a very interesting concept, especially the author does integrate a lot of themes of religion and the impacts and like negative impacts of religion, and kind of the mixing of religion with like politics. I think is very interesting how she integrates that, like into the narrative of the story, and how it's kind of very much a focal point within the story, and like the struggle Kelsey has kind of becoming this new ruler, and kind of she doesn't really necessarily want to mix religion in with her like ruling, which I think is very interesting. But then there's kind of instances of like magic that's kind of slowly trickling in, and then inter-kingdom politics as well, with like a war raging. So I think this is like a perfect kind of epic fantasy that would be perfect to kind of marathon throughout the course of the fall. And yeah, I just think it's really fun. It's a very interesting and like different kind of fantasy than what you typically read, but I really enjoy it, and I think it does kind of give off that fall vibes. And yeah, it's just a great fantasy series, and I definitely want to reread it kind of in the future, maybe in a couple years, because that's how great it was, and I just love the characters and all that stuff. So like I said, if you're looking for an interesting kind of different fantasy, I recommend this one. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your fall reading recommendations are and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.